We're literally seeing an epidemic of these issues in the United States right now.
Dr. Robert Melillo is the co-founder of Brain Balance Centers.
1 out of every 10 children in the United States now is diagnosed with ADHD, and that's a real increase.
My name is Dr. Robert Melillo. My life's mission is to help kids and families with special needs. My wife, Carolyn, makes it all possible. Welcome to our family.
Hello, welcome to our show. I'm Dr. Robert Melillo. This is my beautiful wife, Carolyn. Today we're talking about autism, and so we're going to start off with what's making the headlines. And actually, there's really tragic news, as we know. There was the killing in San Diego or in California that happened on a college campus. And then, as we can see in the headlines, there was another one
in Oregon
that just happened in Oregon. And you had just, showed me on Facebook the article stating that there's been 74 school shootings
in the last 2 years since
in
Sandy
less than
Hook.
2 years, right? Since Sandy Hook. And I think the important thing, and I've done a lot of interviews about this, as you know, because the boy in California had Asperger's. So did the kid in Sandy Hook. He also was believed to have schizophrenia. And the important thing that we're talking about is that this isn't just about gun violence, because guns didn't suddenly explode. There's obviously something going on, and there's a relationship between this rash or increase or epidemic in developmental disabilities and this. It's not that one necessarily is directly related, but
and
there's a relationship.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that the kids, especially children with Asperger's, spend a lot of time in front of video games, especially violent video games. And parents really, really need to know that this can cause psychosis. This
Right.
can actually cause violent behavior and almost a misinterpretation of reality versus fantasy
Right.
in video games and in real life.
Yeah, we just did that Twitter chat on ADHD and its relationship, where most of the research clearly shows that computer games actually contribute to ADHD, but really the research shows that violent video games are the worst, and that's actually the next headline. There was an article that was on Facebook and also out last week talking about the use of iPads and iPhones and computers and how they can literally cause ADHD.
Well, you see, I know living close to the city, you see a lot of children in restaurants, and they seem so well behaved because they're sitting in front of this, iPad, and the parents are having a lovely conversation, and the child is not acting up. But actually, when you put a child in front of an iPad like that, and they're playing games, they're constantly being rewarded, and when you put them in front of a book, they
Right.
can't focus. They're not getting a reward.
And that's
they can't.
a really important thing, that they're building attention, but not the type of attention they need, not sustained attention. They're building this real quickly rewarded attention, and that's what parents don't get. They're like,
No.
well, they can pay attention when they're, watching the game. Why can't they pay attention? And it's really important, because it literally, what it does is it stimulates the left side of the brain and inhibits the right side, which is really where we get sustained attention.
Right.
So the last article was about looking at the sense of touch and how, actually a few years ago in the University of Arizona, they identified that there are these fibers that called C fibers, nerve fibers, that are very small, that we used to think only transmitted pain, but now we realize they actually transmit the sense of touch, but specific touch, light touch that really has an emotional quality, and that kids with autism have a deficiency in that network.
And add to that the fact that you have 2 working parents now, and maybe that sense of touch is not really being provided by caregivers, which is the hard touch and the soft touch, because one they need more than the other, but they can't feel light touch unless
Right.
they have the hard touch.
Well, the thing is that they're hypersensitive to light touch, so a lot of parents want to hug their kids, but the kids, recoil. And the way to get around that is like what Temple Grandin wrote about, is
Right.
deep pressure, which is really a right brain stimulus. You get the deep pressure, and then the calms them down, and then they can go to the light touch. So stay tuned, because when we come back, we're going to introduce you to folks from Eye to Eye, a mentoring project that's helping improve the everyday life of those with learning disabilities. That and much more when we return. Welcome back to the Dr. Rob Show. My first two guests are part of a widely recognized national not-for-profit mentoring program that is changing the lives of thousands of kids and young adults across the United States. Meet Marcus Soutra. He is the Chief Operating Officer from Eye to Eye, and he is joined by Matt Bloom, who is a Think Different diplomat with the program Welcome to You Both. So we were talking earlier, and it's really a fascinating story. Tell us about, first of all, Eye to Eye, how it started, and your relationship with that.
Sure. Well, thank you for having us on today. This is great. So my name is Marcus Soutra. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Eye to Eye, and I'm the person with dyslexia and ADHD myself. I was diagnosed in 3rd grade and went through school really kind of not understanding what those labels meant and how it was going to affect me in school and in my life. And being able, after years of working to accommodate my learning disability and figuring out what accommodations were going to be good for me and learning how to advocate for those accommodations, I went on to college and studied education and then got involved in Eye to Eye in its early stages and I helped build the organization for about the last 8 years.
Okay, so what is Eye to Eye? What's their actual mission? What do they do?
Sure. So we're a national mentor organization for people with learning disabilities by people with learning disabilities. We have 56 chapters around the country in 22 states. And what we do is we get college students, people like Matt here, who have learning disabilities, to work in local middle schools near their colleges with younger kids who have similar labels.
That's really fascinating because you told me you started at Brown University in 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah, in 2004 I started at Brown
2004?
University and was a program there by some students who basically wanted to create a community for themselves, for students
Which is really fascinating because you would think what kids with learning disabilities are at Brown, right? It's an Ivy League school. Obviously, you figure everybody there, but obviously they've developed these incredible compensatory mechanisms to be able to allow them to learn at that level.
Yeah, we're everywhere. We like to say we're in community colleges, state schools, Ivy League institutions. So students with learning disabilities end up in lots of different types of communities, lots of different types of schools.
Great. So what you're doing is you're taking kids that are in college that have obviously learned ways to either compensate or overcome their disabilities, and they're in universities, and they're now going out to the community and working with other kids that have that type of disability.
Yeah, and they're sharing their story, and they're also utilizing our curriculum. We have an art-based curriculum that teaches a few different things. It works on self-esteem, self-advocacy, metacognition, so learning about how you think and how you learn best, and creating an LD community for the college students as well as the middle school students.
That's fantastic. Matt, your story before was really fascinating. So I know you're a diplomat. So explain what that means and explains what you've done and then your story.
Well, when we hear the word diplomat, I like to remind people that I'm one amongst a very large team of people, and we've been everywhere. We've spoken in Washington to senators and congressmen. We've been at schools. We've been at all different educational institutions and facilities. I myself have spoken at places like NYU in front of grad students majoring in teaching people with learning differences. I've spoken at Pace University. I've spoken at the SAT accommodations and evaluation staff while I was in the midst of taking the SAT. And what I do is when I go to these places, I tell them first off about Eye to Eye, who we are and what we do. And then I tell them about LDs, what they are, how they can affect us. And then I give them my firsthand portrayal of what having one is like.
Yeah, so quickly tell us about your story, because you said at a young age you were diagnosed with dyslexia. And then you went through schooling and you went to a special school that accommodated that. And so, tell us about that and how you eventually ended up to where at this point you're really majoring in English as well as psychology in a university.
Well, when I tell my story, I like to ask people if they remember the first grade, and most often they remember bits and pieces. I remember the first grade in its entirety because it was such a traumatic experience for me in a public school. And it was not until I got diagnosed by a doctor on my parents' behalf that I transitioned into a school called Windward that specializes in language-based disabilities, and I stayed there where I repeated the first grade, and I stayed there up until 8th grade until I was ready to transition out into a more mainstream school. And from there, things kind of really fell into place. I really started to, ironically, find a passion for what I loathed only so few years ago.
Right, so that you're now reading above grade level, is that correct?
Well,
or at grade level?
That's a complicated question, because while my reading comprehension is probably above grade level,
right, which is,
if you ask me to read this in a certain amount of time,
right,
it'd probably be much lower
right,
grade level. I read and I love to read, but it's a very long process. It's an active process. It doesn't come naturally as I think it does to most.
Yeah, but the thing is, at this point, you're a freshman now at SUNY Binghamton, which is an incredible school, and you've been able to somewhat overcome. What I want you to do is let people know more about how they can find out about your organization and get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to eye2eyinational.org, obviously, and find out. There's a few different ways to kind of plug into our work. The quickest way, if you have a young child in the tri-state area, would be to get involved in our summer camp that's going on in the first week of July, or July 7th, I should say. The second thing is we have a tour of students who are going to be traveling across the country, sharing their story, and they're going to be doing events all throughout the South and the Northeast, so you can get involved in one of those events there. We also have our co-founder has just written a book that's going to be coming out on August 26th, so that'd be a great guide for parents as well.
Great. Well, thank you, both of you. Up next, find out how service dogs are helping improve the quality of life of those living with autism. That and more when we return, and thank you to you guys. You were great. Welcome back to the Dr. Rob Show. Well, you've heard the saying, a dog is a man's best friend, and that is certainly the case in our next two guests. Meet Nathan Sealove and his service dog, Sylvia. Sylvia is a golden Labrador from Keystone Human Services, and she has been specifically trained to help Nathan in his everyday life. Nathan has autism, and he joins me now. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks.
This is a fascinating story and something I don't think a lot of people know about. So
Yeah.
I know that we had talked that you were diagnosed at a young age, around 9, with autism.
Yep.
And that your symptoms accelerated really, and once you got to middle school, they were really difficult. So why don't you explain what your problems were?
Well, my biggest issue was bullying mainly. Bullying, lack of interest. I had a lot of trouble relating to like all the fellow students, and I would actually, a lot of days I would just spend like sitting down and looking at the clock and just hoping that it would run out so I could get home and, you know, go back to my dogs and pet them.
And that's what you said, that you really felt
Yeah.
at home mostly with the dogs that you had naturally in your family.
Yeah, like when I went to my grandmother's house or a friend's house, like I wouldn't get homesick, I'd get dog sick.
Right. And then you said that you had been working with a therapist,
Yeah.
and the therapist eventually suggested, hey, you know, we can get a dog for you,
Yeah.
right? How did that come about?
Well, first off, they realized that dogs really helped me. Like I was able to relate with dogs better. And, you know, so my parents are saying, okay, we have to do something. We don't want to use like medication, but we need to do something. So my therapist was like, well, what about the idea of an autism service dog? And obviously when I first heard that, I'm like, wow, a dog I can take everywhere?
Sure, as a kid, right?
That would be amazing. So my parents, they started looking into it. They looked into several different service dog organizations, and eventually we found Susquehanna Service Dogs, which is part of Keystone Human Services. And so we contacted them, and this was, you know, first when I was in 5th grade, we contacted them. And we were put on a waiting list for about 1.5 years, and then they brought us in, and you know, they saw how I interacted with demo dogs, and then they brought me in to meet other dogs for meet the dog sessions, where I'd meet dogs that were at the point of their training, where, you know, they wanted to, they were ready to be placed.
That must have been fun.
Oh yeah, I got to meet so many dogs, and I was happy. I loved those dogs.
Well, you know, that's great. I mean, I think that it's important that people know that they can do this, and they
Yeah.
can contact either Susquehanna or other service dog providers, and that's great.
Yeah.
Now, the two things that your dad was saying that it really helped with, which are, again, fascinating, I think, is the fact that a lot of people with autism have stims.
Yes.
And you had a stim, where you said you would bite on your shirt, or
Yeah.
you...
Yeah, I would bite on my shirt, like I would chew on my shirt. I would come home and my shirt would be soaked. There would be holes all through it. It would
And so
be
that
gross.
also made you stand out from other kids and made you look
Yeah.
a little, you know, it made it hard to socialize, right?
Didn't help the bullying.
Right. So the thing that your dad was saying that the dog helped with was redirect your stim. So instead of doing that, you would go and pet the dog, and now she kind of knows when you're doing that, right?
Yep. Well, it's kind of a part of it is her knowing when I need her as a stress ball for sensory, and part of it is me knowing, okay, you know, I need to use my dog. My sensory levels are starting to go badly. I need to bend over and start using
Right.
my dog to calm me
And
down.
the other thing that your dad was saying was really fascinated me was the fact that you couldn't read people. Nonverbal communication is obviously the problem in autism, and you
Yeah.
couldn't read when you were stressing out other people or if you were making them uncomfortable. But your dog would react in a way where she wouldn't come to you, she would avoid you. And that kind of taught you how to be able to monitor your own reactions to make her feel comfortable. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was almost like she was a bridge. She was a bridge between myself and other people.
Yeah, because then you were able to then translate that into people, and,
Yeah.
and then you were able to read her
Yeah.
emotions, and then that allowed you to modify your behavior and then translate it into reading humans.
I would learn when I needed. I would learn what I needed to do to keep her, keep her happy with me, which eventually just made it easier for me to learn about other people.
Right.
I saw nonverbals in her, and I started seeing, oh wow, humans have these too.
Right, and it literally tells us that it literally actually improved or maybe even changed those areas of the brain that are related to autism. And you also said that she helps you pick up girls, right?
Yep. I do have a girlfriend. I've been with her for about 9 months now,
Right.
almost 9 months, and it was a conversation starter.
Well, dogs and babies are always good for girls, right?
Yeah, and it's really fun to. It's really great to be in a relationship, but when you're autistic, you have all these instances where you don't know when you're supposed to tell the truth and when you're not. Like
You know what, that's going to be we're going to have you back just to talk about that conversation. That's universal, by the way. So thank you so much, Nathan. It was great. You and Sylvia, beautiful. Don't go away, because when we come back, Carolyn is joined by some other moms who have some great advice and tips to share with other parents of special needs children when the Dr. Rob Show comes back after the break. And thank you again. Really great.
Welcome back to the Dr. Rob Show. Joining me now in Carolyn's Corner is Casey Rhodes. She's the Director of Brain Balance Center of Glassboro, and Alicia Nevins, who's a mom of a special needs child named Noah. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We're going to start off talking about the Emma Thompson statement in the paper about basically how working mothers can't really do the same job as stay-at-home moms. And what do you think about that in this day and age? Of course, most mothers work, and especially having a child with special needs.
Yeah.
How do you handle the day-to-day issues?
Well, I definitely heard about that and was shocked, needless to say, because it seemed like such a blanket statement.
Sure.
And I've always worked. I've been a career person now. I did leave, not one but two pretty high-end professional careers. One, I was working for Major League Baseball with the Texas Rangers, and Noah was diagnosed and had been removed from 3 or 4 daycares, and so it was definitely working that many hours, all the baseball games, etc. And I was a single mom.
Right.
So it was necessary for me to step back, but I worked still, and it's been important to me to show Noah that work ethic, and that I can't always be right there every time he needs me, because he's already so dependent upon me with his special needs that if I were just at his beck and call, he would use it. And I don't think that it would be beneficial for either of us, truth be told.
And maybe you would lose a little bit of your identity and a little bit. I've seen some moms whose entire focus is just on the children, and they tend to lose themselves a little bit. Now you work at the Brain Balance Centers, and you were saying how some of the moms feel some guilt because they have to go back to work maybe 6 weeks after the baby's born, and they feel that they may contribute a little bit to the special needs situations of the children.
Absolutely. We see it so often, these moms that come in, they're usually the first one to bring their child in because they're the ones that are so attentive, regardless of the fact that they're working or not, of their child's needs overall.
Right.
And what we see when they sit down with me or when they sit down with someone else is that they say, I brought them to, I let them go so soon. I had to go back to work for this reason or the next. And they feel as if it's their fault that their child has the challenges. But in all reality, you're doing the best for your child, whether that's being at home or being at work. And there's no smoking gun of what caused your child to have the needs that they do. But they shouldn't feel guilty at all. They should feel proud of what they're doing for their child and how that they're providing for them the best way that they can.
Absolutely, and we also know that autism starts in the womb. So, so now, how do you feel about your changes in life? How do you feel about letting go of a high-end job and giving more time to Noah?
Oh, well, I wouldn't change a thing I've done. I mean, I've been able to, allow him to have the best therapies that I think could have ever happened. When Noah was first diagnosed, it was pretty transparent that he was not going to be mainstreamed, and he was pretty severe. But through many years of therapy, he's definitely mainstream.
That's great.
I thought I could go back to a full 40-plus hour work week again, but when Noah was actually taking a little bit of some setbacks, and so he ended up enrolling in Brain Balance, 12-week program, and so I went ahead and took another step back in my career. Unfortunately, I have a great partner, husband, who allows me to have less hours. So I'm about 30 hours a week.
Which is perfect.
Oh, it's
You have
perfect.
balance.
And it's flexible too. Like, they allow me to kind of shift my work week around, and as long as I get my stuff done, it's
Absolutely.
good. So
you must have a lot of working moms in Brain Balance that come in and have to balance everything,
Absolutely.
but they do it. They do
Yes,
it.
we see it all the time, and it's what's great about our program. It's not just about the child; it's a full family approach, and we're asking the families to not only be attentive to their needs, but attentive to their own. We always say to the mom, well, before you're about to help your child, can you help yourself? Do you feel as if you're ready to be able to have this time and this commitment to be able to help your family? And whether that means like what you did, and taking some extra hours off of work, or whether it means having that work so that you have that time away so you can recharge yourself. That's exactly what we see all the time. People being able to make a schedule and knowing what needs to be accomplished, and then getting all of that done, and then seeing the results at the end of it all.
absolutely.
And you could certainly have both. You can be a
Yes.
great mother, and you can have a career, and balance both, even with a child with special needs, with the special foods, with the therapies and everything. I commend you. I really do. I commend you. It's not an easy job, and I commend you too for working with the moms. So, ladies, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here and for your wonderful advice. And back to you. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Carolyn. I would like to thank all of our guests today, and to you at home for watching. Remember, we're always here for you, and there's always hope. We will see you next week.